This man just sold his catalog, or his estate rather, David Bowie, for $250 million. That must have been a damn good contract. Check it.
That's it. That's it. Look.
What's up, fam? It's your boy Demuir here, purveyor of all sounds underground. Thank you for joining me on my YouTube channel today, where I'll be discussing contracts in 2022, things to look out for, and how you should plan versus what to expect in this game in today's day and age. But before we jump into things, what I need from you is that SLC. Hit subscribe, like, comment, and more importantly, hit the notifications bell to stay in touch with the new videos that we have up and coming. All right, so let's jump right into things. You probably noticed in the intro my little ode to David Bowie, who in his estate, I believe, sold his whole entire catalog for the sum of $250 million. And that's for one person. That same amount was done in a deal that Berry Gordy did involving Motown Records publishing, a sale made to EMI for the same amount, but that was back then. So in today's terms, the deal would be valued a bit, well, substantially higher, I imagine. However, this is one person, David Bowie, and it's his collection of his entire works. And as a result of that, it should tell you, and don't hate me for saying, you know, content versus art or whatever. My point here is that David Bowie handled his shit properly, and as a result was able to get a reasonable or sizable deal just for his own musical works, which is amazing for his family. So it describes why contracts are so important, especially now where you're actually seeing a lot of major labels starting to mask themselves as an underground label in the scene, but they're really funding key underground people to have this label and say, yeah, here's some money, now go out and get us the content. And as a result, those things are reflected in contracts, which I don't necessarily agree with, but everything has its time and place, especially when it involves your career, because it's not necessarily apples to apples. The things I want right now for my goals versus yours may look different, but we can certainly have a unified or uniform discussion rather on contracts in 2022 as it pertains to the underground electronic music scene. All right, so let's jump right into things. Point number one is perpetuity is just a bad word. And not only is it a bad word, it should also give you immediate red flags and cause you to run for the hills if you see it anywhere in your agreement, because usually when that word is suggested, it's not suggested for your benefit. Rather, it's for the label's benefit to own or have some certain part in that agreement, you know, established and put in place forever, for life. So perpetuity, whenever you see that word, that kind of tells you what means the most to the label, and you want to make sure that that is looked at closely. Point number two for 2 pages or less. 2 pages or less is a thing I've stood by for a number of years now. If the agreement is much longer than that, I generally do not want to get involved in any relationship when it comes to the licensing of my music or any other business contracts I might have with other artists or businesses. I just find that the less pages, the more it forces clarity in terms of the relationship you're looking to enter in, and more clarity is a good thing. The longer the agreement, there's cause for misinterpretation and a need to get lawyers involved, and you should have a lawyer read any agreement, by the way. But I'm saying the longer the agreement, the more that there's the potential for things to be hidden in there that are completely misunderstood or overlooked by you and lawyers in some cases. So 2 pages or less to force clarity. And that will give you a lot of clarity in terms of, you know, the term of agreement, where they stand on publishing, what the royalty splits are, etc., etc. And point number 3, I sort of said this in one of my previous videos with respects to, I think it was how to submit demos, is to make sure you outline expectations for yourself. What are some of the things that are non-negotiable for you as an artist at this stage in the game for you that you just want to make sure the label understands clearly. And you can only get to that place if you have a sit down with yourself and understand what that is. So for me, I will never enter an agreement that is over 10 years. Fuck that. Anytime I see 15, 25 years, like, no way. It just doesn't make any sense. And it's also a play on where I started this video in terms of how important art, content, whatever you want to call it, has become to major labels, investors, all folks involved. The longer that they can own something, they know they can monetize it later in the future with whatever available technologies make themselves present. So very important for you to understand what your non-negotiable terms are and put those forward in the discussion. You know, things like publishing is something I don't negotiate on. I keep all my publishing terms, nothing more than 10 years, as I said. And when I see that the royalty splits are, you know, less favorable to me, anything under 50% is a cause for caution. But also, you might be okay with, hey, a label giving you 40 or 30%, depending on the label and what they're saying they can do for you in your career in that moment in time. So make sure you have that conversation with yourself in terms of expectations. And I just want to, before we move away from that point, I just want to add this piece as well. More and more in 2022, you will find that the terms of these agreements, even if they're 2 pages, are becoming more and more less favorable to you as an artist, and it's primarily due to the fact of labels and artists losing revenue due to streaming. They need to offset the cost. So I saw something very alarming and had some of these conversations recently where the royalty split was as low as 25% to the artist, with the other 75% remaining with the label in terms of how, you know, sales would get split up. And that should tell you something straight away when you see that type of agreement. Now, mind you, you'll more likely see these agreements with larger labels, ironically, and labels that have major label backing. It's not unusual to see that stuff, but they need to be able to recoup their costs in some way, shape, or form. And it's just a huge watch out, I would say, that you need to look out for. And it's predominantly sponsored by the fact that we have lower revenue coming in due to streaming. Some people argue with me and say, no, we've had more streams, and we've actually seen in some cases where streaming revenue has exceeded the digital sales or physical sales. And that's cool for their business model. But I'm just talking on a whole, on average. You know, if you have all of this music content out here and it's being paid at pennies versus the, you know, $1.50 or $2 per track that was, you know, yesteryear, labels need to offset those, you know, losses, and that's how they're going to do it. They're going to try and keep more money in their pocket and pay you, the person that's creating the content or the art that generates the revenue in the first place, for themselves. So huge watch out. And when you see that, I personally would just run for the hills. And lastly is to give the thought to the future. And I'm talking like the immediate future, like 6 months to 2 years out, just because of how rapidly the technology is changing. So when you have a contract in front of you, just think about what future looks like and what that means to you. More and more, depending on how many releases you have behind you and where you are, if you're just entering the game, I would say this is probably a non-issue for you. You're just trying to release records and get on certain labels, and that's cool. You might bite the bullet and say, yeah, I'm cool with only getting 25% of the revenue from my content, which is absurd to say, but you might be okay with that, and a lot of people are just starting out. However, if you're now in year 3 or 5 of your career, and you're starting to release a bit more consistently, and you're starting to see, geez, like, I can retain a lot of this revenue and still build my platform at the same time. These are necessary internal conversations you need to have with yourself. It's extremely important. I can only tell you from my view, it's been great waking up every morning to a Bandcamp notification of who's purchased my music directly. And it's like, a one-click relationship away in terms of your loyal fan base or people who directly support you in your artistry. Just something important to think about, because if you look back 5-10 years ago, there was more of a substantial gap. People could hear your music on a SoundCloud or hear it in a club or somewhere, but there wasn't technologies that told you who the person's song was, and then on top of that said, here's where you can find them online and actually interact with them directly. And we're in that time now where we've cut out all of the fat in between and allowed for artists to connect directly with people who support them loyally. So just something to think about with respects to the future as it pertains to contracts. And there you have it. Those are my thoughts on contracts in 2022 as it pertains to underground electronic music and how rapidly things are changing in this, hopefully soon post-pandemic world. Let me know your thoughts on this one. I usually join the conversation within 48 hours of posting these videos, so I'd love to see what you have to say and get your perspective on things. Much love and respect to you. Peace.